Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something that sounds a bit strange at first. Why don't elephants get cancer nearly as much as humans do?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Totally. But this question, it actually cracks open some really fascinating biology. It's all about, evolution and how bodies protect themselves.
And it starts with understanding cancer itself, which is essentially, well, uncontrolled cell growth. It happens when a cell's DNA gets damaged, accumulates mutations, and starts ignoring the normal rules.
Right. Our bodies usually have ways to deal with that, don't they? Like fixing the DNA or...
Exactly. Repairing the damage, or if it's too far gone, telling the cell to basically self-destruct.
Yeah.
Apoptosis.
Okay. But then you look at an elephant, the animals are huge, over 6,000 kilos sometimes.
Massive.
Which means they have, what, something like 100 times more cells than us? And they live a long time, too.
They do. Decades.
So you'd think, just logically, more cells dividing over more years. Their cancer risk should be astronomical compared to ours.
Precisely. More cells, more divisions means statistically way more chances for one of those divisions to go wrong, for a mutation to happen in a critical spot.
Yeah, the odds just seem stacked against them.
But that's not what we see in reality. Their cancer rates are actually much, much lower than humans.
And that surprising fact is what scientists call Peto's paradox,
Yeah.
named after Richard Peto, who pointed it out.
And it's not unique to elephants either. You see similar things in large whales, for instance.
So this is the big mystery we're diving into today. What's their secret? How are these giant animals seemingly dodging the cancer bullet so effectively?
Well, let's just really quickly nail down why more cells should theoretically mean more cancer.
Go.
Like we said, every time a cell divides, its DNA, its entire genetic blueprint has to be copied perfectly, ideally.
A huge undertaking, millions of times over a lifetime.
Exactly. And the more cells you have and the longer you live, more total divisions happen. Each one is a tiny lottery ticket for a cancer-causing mistake. It's just probability.
Okay, makes sense. But our bodies, and presumably elephant bodies, have defenses. You mentioned repair, self-destruct. There's a specific gene often called the guardian of the genome, right? TP53.
Yes, TP53. It's absolutely critical. It's like the main supervisor inside the cell watching for DNA damage.
What does it do when it finds something wrong?
Well, it has a couple of options. It can pause the cell cycle, basically hit the brakes to allow time for repairs.
Give the repair crews a chance to work.
Right. Or if the damage is just too severe, too dangerous, TP53 can trigger that self-destruct sequence, apoptosis. It essentially tells the cell to take one for the team to prevent a potential tumor.
A crucial job. And how many copies of this TP53 gene do we humans usually have?
Typically, we inherit 2 copies, one from each parent.
2 copies. Seems like a reasonable amount of backup.
It usually does a pretty good job for us, yes.
Okay, but now the big reveal. What about the elephants? Our giant, surprisingly cancer-resistant friends.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Elephants don't just have 2 copies, not even close.
How many then?
They have around 20 copies of TP53, so that means potentially 40 different versions or alleles of this guardian gene.
20 copies, 40 alleles.
Yeah.
That's not just a little more protection. That's like a whole battalion compared to our 2 guards.
It's a huge difference. Think of it as layers upon layers of backup. If one copy fails or isn't quite up to the task for a specific type of damage, there are many others ready to step in.
So it creates this incredibly robust, almost hypersensitive system for detecting problems.
Exactly. And this plays out in lab experiments. When researchers deliberately damage the DNA in elephant cells versus human cells,
What happens?
the elephant cells are far, far more likely to trigger apoptosis to self-destruct than human cells are under similar conditions.
Wow. So their cellular default is almost like, something looks a bit fishy here. Better is to eliminate this cell to be safe, rather than trying too hard to repair it.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah. They seem to have a much lower tolerance for risk at the cellular level. They'd rather sacrifice a potentially damaged cell than risk it becoming cancerous.
Okay, but that brings up the obvious evolutionary question. If having, 20 copies of TP53 is so great for fighting cancer, why don't we have that many? Why don't all animals?
The classic evolutionary trade-off question.
Right. There must be a downside, or evolution would likely favor more copies everywhere, wouldn't it?
Potentially, yes. Evolution is always balancing costs and benefits. Having such a hyperactive cell death system might have drawbacks.
Like what? What could be the cost?
Well, imagine if cells are too quick to self-destruct. Maybe it could interfere with development. Perhaps it impacts tissue repair or regeneration. Or maybe it could even accelerate some aspects of aging by killing off healthy cells prematurely. Fertility could also be affected.
I see. So too much cell death could be just as bad as too little, just in different ways. It's about finding the right balance point for a species lifestyle.
Exactly. There's likely an evolutionary sweet spot. And maybe for humans, our two copies hit our sweet spot, balancing cancer risk with other factors.
So why might evolution have pushed elephants towards that extreme end of the scale with so much cancer protection? What's different about their lives?
Think about elephant life history. Their pregnancies are incredibly long, almost 2 years.
Wow, nearly 2 years.
And they reproduce slowly. A calf every, 4 or 5 years maybe? Plus, they take a long time to mature.
Okay. Slow and steady.
So, in that context, the survival of the mother, especially through her prime reproductive years, is absolutely paramount for the species to succeed. Losing a mother to cancer relatively early would be a huge blow to her lifetime reproductive output.
That makes a lot of sense. The evolutionary pressure to keep those breeding females alive and healthy for as long as possible would be immense.
Immense pressure, yes. Much more so, perhaps, than in species that reproduce earlier and more often.
Whereas with humans, while obviously cancer is devastating at any age, a lot of cancers tend to develop after our peak reproductive years.
Correct. Which means, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, the selective pressure against those later life cancers might be slightly less intense than the pressure on elephants to survive through their long reproductive window.
So different life strategies, different evolutionary pressures, leading to different genetic toolkits for fighting cancer. Fascinating.
It really is. Our two copies of TP53 work for our life history. Their 20 copies work for theirs.
Okay, so we've kind of unraveled the why behind the elephant's resistance. Now, the big question for us, what can we actually learn from this? Can studying elephants help us fight cancer in humans?
This is definitely the exciting frontier. Scientists are absolutely looking at this. They're studying the elephant TP53 genes, how they work, how they trigger that heightened cell death response, with the hope, of course, of finding ways to apply those principles to human health.
So what does that look like in practice? Are we talking about giving people elephant genes? That sounds a bit sci-fi.
Hey, yeah, it's not quite that direct. It's more about understanding the mechanism. For example, could we develop drugs, small molecules that maybe make our own TP53 proteins work more effectively? Or perhaps boost the pathways that TP53 uses to trigger apoptosis?
Ah, okay, so enhancing our existing systems inspired by the elephant strategy.
Exactly. Another avenue is gene therapy, but perhaps more targeted. Could we deliver extra functional copies of TP53s specifically to cancer cells, or maybe even to the tissues of people at very high risk of developing cancer?
I see. Trying to replicate that backup system locally where it's needed most.
Precisely. It's about learning from nature's solutions. How does that extra TP53 make elephant cells so good at killing themselves off when damaged? Can we mimic that?
It sounds like it's still early days research-wise, but the potential seems, well, huge.
It is early days, definitely. There are many hurdles, scientific and technical, but the fact that elephants exist and do this provides a powerful proof of concept. Nature has already solved this problem, in a way.
Yeah, it shows it's biologically possible to have this level of resistance.
The potential to boost our own natural defenses, especially for high-risk individuals, is a really significant goal driving this research.
Okay, so let's recap the main points here. Elephants are huge, live long lives, should get lots of cancer based on cell numbers and divisions.
But they don't. Much lower rates than us. Peto's paradox.
And the key seems to be their genetics specifically having around 20 copies of the TP53 guardian gene compared to R2.
Right, which makes their cells much more likely to self-destruct upon detecting DNA damage, acting as a very strong preventative measure.
And this likely evolved because of their slow reproductive strategy, putting intense pressure on keeping breeding individuals, especially mothers, alive and healthy for a long time.
That sums it up nicely. It's a fantastic example of how investigating a seemingly odd biological quirk can teach us fundamental things about, cancer and evolution.
It absolutely changes how you see elephants, doesn't it? They're not just these majestic, giant creatures. They're kind of biological marvels of cancer resistance, like cancer-fighting superheroes of the savannah.
That's a great way to think about it. And it really underscores how much we can still learn by studying the natural world, looking at the different solutions evolution has come up with.
We're really just starting to understand the secrets locked away in their genes.
Just scratching the surface. There's likely more complexity to it as well, other contributing factors we haven't even discovered yet.
And maybe, just maybe, the answers hidden in the elephant's biology could one day give us powerful new ways to tackle cancer in humans. It's a pretty hopeful thought.
It is, and it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What other biological puzzles out there, things that seem strange or don't quite fit, might hold the keys to future breakthroughs in medicine? It really pays to stay curious about the weird and wonderful solutions nature comes up with.